origin story, manifest destiny's creation of economic deserts and the devastation of subsistence economy. Abstract, Father Sky. Native American communities are tied to the land historically, physically, culturally, and spiritually. Communities were forcibly removed from traditional homelands, either by settlers taking over Native American lands by government designation, leading to relocation to spaces that were constitutionally designed as unmarketable for thriving economic enterprise. Without the ability to capitalize a strong government from the land, like other communities, to bring in outside businesses within the community to circulate local dollars, and to build generational wealth and knowledge of a foreign financial system, Native American individuals and families have been stripped of the American dream of cultivating wealth in the United States. Prayer, Song, and Introduction. East, Sweetgrass, Beginning. Gumigwachwanaman, Oma, Ma Wadishiwanong, Nungum, Minwa, Bago Sendamong, We Nagadawanamong, Wenini. We are thankful to be here, gathering today, and we hope to consider things carefully in a good way. Gwachwindam, Ma Babi Marizi Win. Nemi Gwachwindam, Ma Babi Marizi Win. Nemi Gwachwindam, Ma Babi Marizi Win. Nemi Gwachwindam, Ma Babi Marizi Win. I am in a state of gratitude for this life. Gejemanado, Creator, I want to take a moment to acknowledge my gratitude for the collective knowledge shared for this series of articles, for the knowledge shared from ancestors, answering questions through dreams and prayers, for my brothers and sisters with lived experiences, sharing their cultivated knowledge, and for my Western teachers imparting the Western ways of knowing and communicating in this world. I also want to thank the National Endowment for Financial Education for their consideration of hosting these articles and sharing this story. Jimigwech, many thanks. This is the first piece in a 7-part series unpacking the complexities surrounding financial education for Native American communities, utilizing interviews from prominent Native American individuals across the financial education sector and accessible literature. Together, these 7 pieces will create a snapshot of this landscape. As financial knowledge coexists with access to financial products and services in the National Endowment for Financial Education's personal finance ecosystem, this article discusses the history of land-based asset allocation for Native American communities and its relationship to asset building and wealth generation within the United States. A thriving economy is imperative to the implementation and sustainability of financial education. You cannot financial education your way out of poverty, states Native Community Development Financial Institution Four Bands Community Fund Executive Director Lakota Vogel, Cheyenne River Sioux, sharing the collective frustration that many Native American practitioners face in uplifting community members from systemic poverty. Financial education defined by the National Endowment for Financial Education as a systemic approach to cultivating financial knowledge and decision-making skills, is an integral part of the United States economic system. However, it cannot be discussed without addressing several intersections with the current Native American lived experiences. History: South, Cedar, Growth. Before colonization, thousands of Native American communities operated intricate economies, creating vast trade routes across Americas, developing natural currencies, and engaging in exporting goods. Once colonization began in the mid 1400s, Native American communities endured a series of events that would strip nations of their ability to cultivate the land for sustaining a subsistence-based economy, let alone basic needs for survival. The lasting effects of this process have left these communities with strong cultural ties to ancestral lands, economically barren, and bound to federal regulations that jeopardize sovereignty at the cost of cultivating economic strength. The American Indian is of the soil, whether it be the region of forests, plains, pueblos, or mesas. He fits into the landscape, for the hand that fashioned the continent also fashioned the man for his surroundings. He once grew as naturally as the wildflowers. He belonged just as the buffalo belonged. Luther Standing Bear, Oglala Sioux Chief. A subsistence economy is one that is reliant upon the renewable use of wildlife resources for personal and community consumption and goods. Subsistence is the mainstay of food security in Native villages. Subsistence contributes to the cultural and physical survival of Native communities on a daily basis, states Dr. Rosita Whirl Plinkett, chair of the Subsistence Committee at the Alaska Federation of Natives. In addition, Native American culture and society relies on the importance of an economy based on the collective strength, rather than the Western model of individual wealth accumulation. Sustainably harvesting and growing natural resources. It's important to understand the distinction between these two models of economic management because the indigenous model is a holistic approach that encompasses respect and reciprocity with natural surroundings and the collective community. Native American tradition and values conflict with the Western economic model. Despite each Native American nation being very different in terms of beliefs, language, and culture, there is one thing at the center of most American Indian spiritual belief systems, and that is the basic principle that spirituality draws heavily upon the lands and beings of our sacred Mother Earth, according to the Red Road Project. Native culture is rooted in the land and the bounty of life that it brings forth. And naturally, the economic systems of Native American communities are also tied to the land. According to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a federal Indian reservation is an area of land reserved for a tribe or tribes under treaty or other agreement with the United States, executive order, or federal statute or administrative action as permanent tribal homelands, and where the federal government holds title to the land and trust on behalf of the tribe. There are approximately 326 Indian land areas in the U.S. administered as federal Indian reservations. For example, reservations, pueblos, rancherias, missions, village, communities, etc. The signing of the Indian Removal Act in 1830 by President Andrew Jackson forcibly removed Native Americans from their home territories to U.S. government-designated lands, the most famous being the Trail of Tears. However, several relocation marches took place, removing 100,000 Native Americans from their homelands throughout the 1800s, as stated by the National Congress of American Indians. Most tribal lands will not readily support economic development. Many reservations are located far away from tribes' historical, cultural, and sacred areas, as well as from traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering areas. Moreover, the Homestead Act of 1862 distributed around 48 million acres of Native American land to settlers. In 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Indian Appropriations Act stating, "No Indian nation or tribe within the territory of the United States shall be acknowledged or recognized as an independent nation, tribe, or power within whom the United States may contract by treaty." This eliminated individual treaties with tribal nations. In 1887, the Dawes Severalty Act was implemented to break apart the reservation lands by granting allotment to individual Native Americans. Consequently, much of this land was checkerboarded with non-native landowners, sold off to non-natives, and fractionated through the division of land to heirs. 50 years later, in 1932, the Indian Reorganization Act solidified the privatization of reservation lands, terminating the allotment system of land. Tribes could self-govern and incorporate businesses, and a $10 million revolving loan fund was made available through the Bureau of Indian Affairs for commercial endeavors. As outlined by the U.S. Department of the Interior Natural Resources and Revenue data, Native American land ownership is complex. There are two types of native land: trust land, where the government holds the legal title, and fee land, land that's purchased by tribes. Discussion. West, tobacco, maintenance. Manifest destiny is the philosophy that expansion westward was the duty for white Americans to settle the continent through conquering the land. This process of expansion was at the expense and devastation of Native people and cultures. Since Native culture and survival are tied so closely with generational knowledge of traditional lands, settlers and the U.S. government were invoking mass genocide by removing Native Americans from ancestral territories, with an estimated 50 million American indigenous lives lost. The Native Americans that remained were left on the lands that were not their ancestral territories, or small, insignificant portions of their historical lands, now known as reservations. Reservation lands mostly are what we call in federal Indian law restricted lands, meaning they probably can't be sold or alienated or collateralized without the consent of the federal government or of the tribe or both. And that creates some serious bureaucratic hurdles to developing and using financing to start government projects or economic development projects, states Professor Matthew L. M. Fletcher, Anishinaabe, Harry Burns Hutchins Collegiate Professor of Law and Professor of American Culture at the University of Michigan. He also noted that due to the perceived jurisdictional complexities and implicit racial biases, lenders are hesitant to work with Native tribes. We hang on to, we cherish trust land, even though it has incredible negative economic benefits, because it's our only way to maintain solid jurisdictional power, says Lance Morgan, Ho-Chunk, President and Chief Executive Officer of Ho-Chunk Inc., clarifying the role of trust lands for Native Americans. We're in a competitive jurisdiction with the states, and we will trade jurisdictional power for economic power any day of the week. That's unique to our identity, but I don't think tribes have to choose tribal sovereignty and poverty as one. In examining economies in the most basic layers, The complexities of sovereignty of land and barriers to economic development become more defined. First Nations Development Institute and Awista Corporation's Native-specific financial education curricula, Building Native Communities, teach the concept of an economy with multiple layers, starting with the individual and extending toward community, and then concluding with the non-community. The individual layer of the economy is made up of the individually owned businesses, where business owners are within the community and invest and circulate revenue back into the community. The community layer consists of small businesses, nonprofit organizations, and tribally owned enterprises that will also be circulating revenue back into the community. A large misconception of tribal enterprises, especially casino revenue, is that the revenue from these businesses act like a for-profit entity, and the CEO and board members are profiting or are in large sum payments to tribal citizens. However, the business revenue supports the government and social programs, for example, housing and healthcare, offered to the community and the tribal citizens, unlike other businesses or corporations in the non-native world. Professor Fletcher reflected on interactions with other governments and lending entities, highlighting how tribal nations operate just as independent governments in serving their respective community members. That's the only reason that tribes exist. I mean, there are cultural aspects of this to this, of course, but that's what tribal governments are supposed to be doing. In addition to serving their own respective sovereign governments, certain states also mandate a percentage of gaming revenue from the tribes to be allocated to the cities, towns, or counties for public services. For example, the Pasquayaki tribe takes 12% of its total annual contributions to the surrounding communities in their gaming revenue sharing funds program. To further understand the breadth of tribal enterprise and their importance in economic development in Native communities, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis Center for Indian Country Development built and examined a data set of nearly 12,000 tribally owned small businesses in 2021 and states tribally owned businesses create economic opportunity for Native Americans and non-natives alike. With the challenges tribal nations face in generating revenues, tribes create enterprises as a key revenue stream to support tribal governments and therefore provide essential public goods to tribal communities. The non-community layer consists of businesses that do not have the opportunity to infuse capital back into the community. Because of trust land, there are very few non-tribal businesses owned and operated on reservations, including banking institutions. According to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation's 2019 survey, 15.3% of Native communities are unbanked households, compared to Black 13.5%, Hispanic 12.2%, and white 2.5%. A lot of Indians are underbanked, Professor Fletcher Anishinaabe explains. It is my understanding that they live on the reservation, that if they live on the reservation, they probably are in a banking desert. And it's really a difficult thing for tribal members to live and breathe, so to speak, in the financial sector, in the financial space, if they live in Indian country. It's not impossible, but it's really difficult. He also shared a personal experience in a vast financial desert on the Hoopa Valley Indian or tribal reservation, where the closest bank was over 90 minutes away. Not only was there an extremely long distance to conduct in-person banking, but this specific bank was also the only one available and not the best banking option in terms of products and services available. In the article, Tribal Leakage: How the Curse of Trust Land Impedes Tribal Economic Self-Sustainability, the authors articulate the difficulties entrepreneurs face on lands held in trust, as they are not able to borrow against the equity of their homes or land. With fewer small businesses on reservation lands, consumers are forced to purchase goods and services outside of their communities, resulting in an economic leak. Lance Morgan describes the average reservation as a government entity sharing a jurisdiction with a state entity, creating conflicting government entities fighting over the same jurisdiction. Outlined in his paper, Ending the Curse of Trust, he explains why poverty is perpetuated on tribal trust lands. Where its original intent was to keep non tribal members from stealing the little land that was left to their respective tribes, it has created an economic desert where the tribe cannot utilize the land for bonds to build schools or roads. The only way we are going to achieve real sovereignty is if we control our own destiny, he says. Morgan also noted that farming is recent for Native communities because of new non-collateralized access to farm capital. If you look at ranching, most Native ranch land is ranched by natives because you can collateralize the animals. For a large swath of the country, Native American farming has been wiped out, especially on the individual basis, he states. So all you can do is lease out your land to a farmer who then makes money off of it. Or you can lease out your energy resources to an energy company who makes money off of it. And the fact that all this makes us poor over time. At the Ho-Chunk tribe of Nebraska, they are farming 6,000 acres, but have had to utilize corporate credit to do so. In addition, they had left farmland out of trust to leverage it to purchase more land. If it had been put into trust, the tribe would not be able to leverage it the same. So when you think about assets, we're including a wide range of assets, anything from tribal sovereignty, natural resources, spirituality, important assets such as homes, education, tribal lands, states Dr. Christy Fensel, Osage, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Native Asset Coalition. In terms of native lands, homelands, territories, reservations, and thinking about how do we protect our native lands and engage in development with a Western financial system in a way that is sustainable and can help us continue to build assets in a broad way. In addition to supporting individual and community-based economies, tribal nations can expand beyond the government set reservation borders to participate in financial systems. Professor Fletcher and Lance Morgan noted that tribal economic operations are not required to be held on trust land. All the money that you get for the rest of history is going to come exclusively from this plot of land. That's bullshit. We don't have to, and we've bought into it by thinking that we have to only do things on our reservation lands, states Professor Fletcher. And yes, it's true. The Gaming Act says we have to do that. But there's not a lot of laws that require us to operate from a home base. So, I think that it's a philosophical understanding that should change. Wisdom, North, Sage, Conclusion. In conclusion, through a process of manifest destiny and land relocation, Native Americans have been stripped of the ancestral lands and ways of knowing the land to cultivate the traditionally thriving subsistence economy. Moreover, the restrictions on Native American lands have a negative snowball effect on economic growth and asset acquisition for Native Americans. The inability to collateralize land as a tool to leverage additional assets at an individual and government level make it impossible to build and sustain small businesses on reservation lands, which in turn cause an economic leak to external businesses that do not support the tribal community economy. The fewer financial enterprises and diminished economic opportunities mean that there are higher rates of unemployment, lower rates of generational wealth and knowledge transference, and lower overall financial well being. Without the initial assets to manage, financial education cannot be fully applied. Tribal communities could provide the best financial knowledge, but without the assets to manage, it proves useless. Financial knowledge is a core concept in the National Endowment for Financial Education's personal finance ecosystem, interwoven with the financial skills and access and inclusion. You cannot financial education your way out of poverty, and it is extremely difficult to climb out of poverty living in an economic desert. Disclaimer: Mother Earth. There are 574 federally recognized tribes and hundreds of unrecognized tribes in the United States, each with a unique colonization story that has influenced their community members and descendants' interactions with the mainstream financial system. These articles are intended to explain a generalized Native experience and support a journey of positive change in relation to Native American, Hawaiian Native, and Alaska Native communities. About the Weaver, the Spirit Within. Buju, Migaziakwe Nindigu, Stephanie Cote Indigenous Class, Grand Traverse Band Odawa Minwa Ojibwe Nindabanakos, Mangan Dodum. Hello, spirits know me as Eagle Woman. I am called Stephanie Cote. I am from the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. I am of the Wolf Clan. Stephanie Cote descends from a lineage of basket weavers. Honoring her ancestry, these articles are woven from common Native knowledge, accessible online articles, and the wisdom imparted by Native peers and elders to support hypotheses developed from the intersectionality of Native American experience and financial education. She is Ottawa and Potawatomi from the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians from northern Michigan, and a senior program officer at Owista Corporation, leading the Financial Education and Asset Building Department. The one thing I wanted to highlight with the series is that for each piece, I'll be utilizing a different background and dressing in a certain way to honor different aspects that complement the piece. So today I have a wool blanket behind me. It's a Pendleton, but it also symbolizes the type of blanket that was utilized during the colonization through trade. And there's a common phrase that's utilized in Indian country known as smallpox blankets, and where there isn't concrete evidence of malice through these trades, like invoking specifically these diseases that would eradicate several Native American community members in the millions, it was known that the diseases did come with colonization. So that's why I utilized this piece. It wasn't mentioned in the piece specifically, but it is a significant piece of Native American culture and colonization. Another thing was this is a ribbon dress that I'm wearing, and calico material or print and cotton material, and these were often created by different communities, and when I know they were utilized in the Woodlands area, which is where my ancestry is from. And then today also I just did left my hair down, so the hair will also be representative, and there was no jewelry, just because I wanted to keep it as close to the time period of the piece as possible. So in future, I'll be highlighting different artists as well if I'm utilizing their jewelry. And today I made the ribbon dress, so that's what I made. And this is a Pendleton blanket. And I look forward to showcasing different pieces for each of the articles that are written for the series.